Hello, everybody. It's Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And today we have co-writer, director Darius Marder, and the star of the film, Riz Ahmed. And before we plunge into it, I just want to read a quote from the Hollywood Reporter that Riz Ahmed's performance and a short for that script by Marder and his brother Abraham ensure that this remains one man's story and one that should be warmly welcomed. Thank you guys for being here. Incredible film. Darius, I want to start right away and dive into that the fact that we're used to seeing films visually from the point of view of characters, but from the very first scene at the concert, that we are immersed from the point of view of sound from the main character, and it takes over from that. Can you tell us about when did you decide that that was the route that you needed to go, where we're totally immersed inside the head and sonically from the character?
Well, thanks first for the kind words. And I've been calling it point of hearing because that's really what it is. It's not the view, it's the hearing. And I love that you bring it up from the beginning of the film. I think that's an astute observation of yours because it's not overt. It could have been it could be seen or heard as an omniscient sound, but yes, in fact, it is. You are really with Ruben and in his mind and through his ears from the very first frame, and even before the first frame, even while the sound is going. So the answer to the question about when that began or when I thought to tell the story like that really does go back a long time, probably 12 years ago. And because I was playing with this footage of a documentary that Derek Cianfrance was making of
Metalheads.
That's right.
Metalheads.
And he was filming. Derek's such a great filmmaker. He was filming this band Jucifer, and they're an insanely loud band. And the real salient kind of detail is that they're a couple on stage. They're a two-person band, a man and a woman, same construct as Sound of Metal. But when I was playing with that footage, I started to kind of gather this idea of point of hearing. What would it, I'm really interested, first of all, and have been for a long time since I was a teenager, in first person perspectives in movies. I think they're rare, and especially when they're extremely committed, because a very unique kind of empathic process can take place if you have the structure of a story to support it. And so I really understood that I hadn't at least seen this, and it took a while to birth it and I would say fully commit to it, because for a long time I was extremely interested, still am, in Lou's story. I was really almost equally interested in both stories, honestly, Lou and Ruben. And I wrote Lou's entire story. That is, when she left, I wrote the whole thing through her perspective as well. And because I was really interested in the contrast, very interested in codependence, the balance of relationship. But I kind of realized at one point I had to commit to this perspective. And that was a couple years later.
And Riz, to bring you in, you've worked obviously in other films before, but this approach of having a character's sonic world be part of it, how did that affect you, as a performer, and was it a more challenging approach to tackle something like this?
To be honest, it was something that really came up for me just when we first met, Darius and I, and he told me that, he wants the sound to be very immersive and he wants it to feel very authentic. And that meant two things from my point of view. One was that when I was playing the drums on screen, I would be playing the drums for real. And the other thing was that the audience would be, as Darius put it, very much invested in Ruben's point of view or point of hearing. So they'd be experiencing sonically what he's experiencing. And then once he told me that, my main job was to go away and learn the drums and that kind of thing, and to just trust that he had this vision that would be uniquely supportive to what I'd be trying to do. But it was something that I thankfully didn't have to worry about too much. it was something that Darius, you know, and Nicola, the sound designer, and you know, and everyone involved in the really extensive sound mix were able to kind of place around the performance and around the footage to kind of really help support it. Now, he did tell me at certain moments on set, for example, when he first experiences a big burst of tinnitus at the merch stall at the gig, Darius said, listen, there's going to be a moment where we're going to hear things from your point of view over here. So, and in a way, just kind of knowing that was enough. To know that the audience would be with you on that journey in that way meant that you didn't have to kind of push or stretch to kind of pull them in with you. Your job is just to kind of live inside that experience. And a really great idea of Darius's that helped me on that was to actually use audio blockers. So we had hearing aids and we switched them into a white noise setting and placed them deep in my ear canal. So at different moments, at different scenes, Darius would press a button that would cut off my hearing completely to the extent where I couldn't even hear my own voice. And those moments of kind of shock and disorientation are really authentic. So I guess knowing that there was that support in the sound design meant that I could just live in the experience and trust that the audience would come with me on that journey without having to push for that.
Mm-hmm. And Darius, I'm going to continue obsessing about the technical sound stuff. You know, so we are listening the point of view of, the point of hearing from Ruben. But then what is one of the remarkable things that I noticed is that we're listening to also to the internal world of Ruben. So we're not listening sound from the outside, the air. We're listening to his body. I'm not making this up. So
we're not making this up. And there's a little bit of a subconscious metaphor occurring in all of this, which is to say, as this thing is happening, that is this kind of externalized trauma, we as an audience and Ruben simultaneously are actually hearing their insides more. It's drawing him closer to his inner world. It's drawing him closer to the realm of the myriad things that may have forced him into addiction 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's drawing him and us inside. And so there is that metaphor that exists in an emotional plane and then a literal physical plane, because that's something that happens when everyone knows the experience when you close your ears, you block your ears with your fingers, you suddenly hear the inside of your mouth. It kind of pulls you inside. Mm-hmm. One of the first things that Nicola and I did in Paris way before we shot was we went into a sound museum, and we went into this soundless chamber, this anechoic chamber. I'm pronouncing it wrong. And it's soundless in the sense that when you speak, it's like there's no reverberation of any kind, and you feel the sense of getting sucked into yourself. So when Nicola came to set, which is extremely rare for a sound designer to be on set, he was miking the inside of Riz quite literally, and in so doing, Riz had an incredibly intense process in the making of this movie, really genuinely intense, on and off the camera, and to his credit. And he was going to places that were very real emotionally. And what Nicola was doing was actually capturing the emotional resonance of Riz when he was in those places, quite literally. Mm-hmm. The dryness of his mouth, the heartbeat, the eyelids, all of those physical realities are what you do hear in the sound mix.
And Riz, how did that make you feel to have, were you self-conscious that your body sounds were being recorded?
No, I wasn't. Part of what was so special about this whole process was the environment that Darius created on set, which was very much about putting the performance first, even though there were all these technically supportive aspects in terms of, shooting on film or having a really unique approach to sound design and sound recording on set. They never got in the way of our process. If anything, they kind of helped, because if you're really trying to record the authentic sonic and visual unfolding of the story, which Darius was really, really committed to, it means that you shoot chronologically. It means that you don't ask actors to hit marks. It means that you kind of let them run free in a way so that you can capture authentically everything you need to. So it was almost kind of felt like very much being supported and being held, knowing that anything that you do, any impulse that comes wouldn't be wasted, wouldn't be lost. I think that it was quite unique because a lot of the time I think directors can come to a film with a very clear idea in their head of what they want the result to be. And I think for Darius, it was, at least from my point of view, it felt more like there was a very, very clear idea of what the process has to be, and a real kind of openness to what, excuse me, the results might be. So that meant having lots of kind of technical, kind of pairs of hands around you to capture things, but then letting them happen.
And Darius mentioned that you encountered a lot of challenges creating this role. You had to learn sign language, of course. You had to learn how to become a drummer. Can you walk us through some of that?
Yeah, I mean, there were challenges. There were also tremendous gifts in lots of ways for me as a person and also for this performance, because when you learn to play the drums and you learn American Sign Language, you're learning to communicate non-verbally in a way that opens your body up to a different level of receptivity, a different level of communicative vibration, as an actor, which I think, was important for Ruben. He's a character who has to start listening with his whole body, communicating with his whole body. So learning these kinds of nonverbal communication was really, really important. I had amazing teachers, Guy Licata on the drums and Jeremy Lee Stone for American Sign Language. And they both welcomed me into their worlds, the world of drumming and that kind of music and the deaf community in New York. And I feel like Jeremy in particular and the deaf community in New York really taught me the meaning of, as I said, listening, which isn't something you just do with your ears. It's something you do with your whole body. It's about holding energy for other people. And, acting is listening. So in a way, I kind of feel like they weren't just my drum and ASL teachers. They kind of became my acting teachers without them even realizing it. They were opening me up in a new way as a performer.
Darius, I have to tell you, one of the reasons why this film has resonated with me so much is because of the pandemic and when it hit, and COVID and everything that defined us, that the exterior things that defined who I was were being taken away, were drastically taken away. And then there was, and I think I speak for a lot of people, we were wondering, who are we? Our sense of self was sort of rattled. And one of the themes of this movie is that you have Ruben, that the things that define him are sort of taken away, stripped away, and then he has to ask himself, who is he? Who is he? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I do feel really bad about starting this pandemic just so people would feel this movie. It just feels selfish, but no, it's wild, I mean, everything you're saying is true. And I've heard it over and over again. I felt it myself. There's a really unique quality to what's happening globally right now. It's really unique. I don't think it's happened in anyone's memory, where we are all being forced to deal with ourselves in a way that is unique to this experience. And not just deal with ourselves, but if we deny that process, it's dangerous. It's quite literally and physically dangerous to us and dangerous to others. So it really does parallel that journey that Ruben was on. And I think that because of that, this movie is begging an audience to go on a very visceral journey towards something that you may or may not feel You know, there may be a feeling at the end of this movie that you can have, which is very different than a concept or an idea. You know, it's an actual physical feeling. And I think that because of this pandemic, I think we all are dealing with a major trauma, probably more major than we think we're dealing with. You know, we're some of us are more fortunate than others, and some of us have gotten sick and some of us haven't, but every day is defined by this invisible reality. And and that's the case this entire movie. That's what's happening the entire movie. And I definitely think I think it's remarkable. I think it's a remarkable parallel. And I would say the only difference, and just to be, you know, to say it, is that, you know, the only thing I'm careful about in the comparison is that this pandemic is going to come and go. And in the realm of the issues we're dealing with, either around deafness or around addiction, that's going to be something that's here with us for an eternity. And as long as we're around. So I say, you know, I have a lot of respect for that fact.
Riz, Darius brought up the idea of codependency, and then you do have this codependent relationship with Lou, you know, played wonderfully by Olivia, and then you have this parallel relationship with yeah, what is
Joe.
the Joe, correct. You know, can you talk to us about, I mean, I love the fact that this codependent relationship with Lou is both creative, but at the same time it could be destructive. You know, can you address that codependent aspect of the relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, it was absolutely a kind of central part of, you know, Ruben's character and Ruben's story, which is, as Darius is saying, no, we can all find things that allow us to not have to deal with ourselves or sit with ourselves, you know. And I think for Ruben, one of those things is his music and the drums, and you know, this life that they've built on the road, constantly restless, literally never sitting still. And I think the other big one is obviously Lou. And so in a way, he swapped out his old addictions for these new addictions, which is his relationship and his music. And, you know, with any addiction, it's about not having to, well, amongst many other things, dealing with trauma and processing all of that. But it's about finding a way of not having to deal with those difficult emotions and deal with sitting and facing that void. So it is absolutely something that's in a way stabilizing him and keeping him afloat and keeping him moving forwards. But it's also something, this relationship at least, that's stopping him from having to, you know, process his own demons. And so in a way, deafness for him, although he sees it as a kind of loss and a lack and something that's cutting him off from the world, actually it's a portal, it's a gateway, just like this pandemic is, to actually connecting more with himself, you know, being cut off from others in that way, or at least people like Lou initially, forces him to have to kind of turn inwards, which is why it's so difficult for him to sit still and write, you know, every morning as Joe wants him to. You know, and with that relationship and with the Joe relationship, we filmed, as I said, the film chronologically, which means that we were kind of really living into these relationships. And by the time we had the goodbye scenes, all of the goodbye scenes, they were genuinely emotional. You know, we'd all become close. Olivia and I had been practicing as a band together for weeks, you know, at that point. Paul and I, when we have our goodbye scene, Paul Racy, who plays Joe so brilliantly,
Yeah,
you know, that would be the last moment that we were really hanging out together. And the last time I'd be, you know, using American Sign Language, which I've been learning for, you know, 8 months by that point. So there was a kind of level of authenticity to those relationships that was created through the filming process. But those relationships really are the heart of the story, and that they portray and represent Ruben's attempt to paper over his own cracks with external relationships.
and you also transform your body you know, you become very lean and muscular in this. Is that something, Darius, you and Riz came together? Riz, you're the one that came up with.
Oh yeah, I just thought I needed to look more like Darius. You know, I saw on my first meeting, Darius sat down, he took his shirt off, and he said this, and so I thought, okay, cool, let's do that.
As I recall, you thought, man, I could never achieve that. And I said, you know what, man? Yes, you can. I believe in you. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. You'll get there.
Yeah. So, you know, I hope to have achieved a fraction of what Darius threw down that day. But, you know, it's interesting because we spoke a lot about this idea of Ruben being very disciplined, very regimented, him living a kind of lean and quite Spartan existence, for example, in that mobile home, you know, in his mobile studio. And so that needed to be reflected in the discipline of his diet, the rigidity of his daily workout regime, the Spartan lean kind of no superfluous, no added extras approach to his life would also be represented to his body, which would be kind of low in body fat. So there was a kind of an element to that, but it's also, you know, interestingly, it's the drums kind of really supported that process of physical training because it's such a physical instrument. It is like a cardio workout, particularly when you're double pedaling as well as we were. And I just want to add actually on this point, you know, I've spoken a lot in interviews about, in Q&As about Guy Licata, my drum teacher, Jeremy, my sign instructor, but my physical trainer, Leighton. It was kind of crazy because I found him through nothing to do with production, just like a random, you know, friend of a friend. And he started training me in Brooklyn. And 6 weeks into training together, he just said, sorry, 1 minute. And he took these hearing aids out of his ear and he adjusted them and put them back in. And I didn't realize he wore hearing aids. And we hadn't even discussed what the film was about. Just knew we were training for a role. And he said, yeah, I'm losing my hearing, you know. That's kind of a journey that I'm on, and my mind was blown. It was just kind of one of many occasions of just kind of coming across people who are going through exactly this. I remember a flight from London to New York. I sat next to someone wearing cochlear implants, and we just spoke for hours. But Leighton was very generous in his time and helping me create that workout regime to reflect the character.
Darius, I warned that I was going to get technical. You shoot in 35 millimeter Techniscope, which is 2 perforations. Can you tell us why you went that route and the look of the film because of that?
Well, I love 2-perf, first of all. I mean, it's a great format because you get twice as much per roll, number one, because there's no wiggle room with 2-perf. You know, you don't have the entire width of the stock to play with. So you're really utilizing exactly right to the edge with 2-perf, which is great because it buys you a little more room to roll per roll, so you don't roll out as quick. And I really love the look of 2-perf. It's what all the spaghetti westerns were shot on. It's really filmic. It's just beautiful, and I've always been drawn to it, but also because there's a quietly epic quality to this movie, and it has a kind of outrageous scope to it. It has these 3 distinct acts that really travel. You know, you begin in this kind of urban American landscape, and then you end up in this completely other place that's in the middle of nowhere, that's very naturalistic and green. And I knew how the greens would look on this stock, and I really wanted that. And then you know, you end up in a completely different environment in Europe. And so I really wanted to kind of give a nod to that quality of the epic, which is very wide. And, you know, I worked with Danielle Bouquet on that very closely. I think that shooting on film is probably, you know, it's nuts. I mean, I had no business doing it, and it was a tough fight, but I don't think I don't ever really want to shoot a film not on film. I mean, I'm just in love with film, and I think that it raises the energy while you're shooting. It's the single most kind of defining like creative choice you can make right off the bat, you know, because it's a living thing, and I just love it. I love what it does to a set.
But every 11 minutes, you have to change the canisters. How did that
Right.
affect shooting the scenes?
It does affect shooting the scenes, but I believe in restrictions. I think freedom is a problem. You know, I think that I've been on sets, you know, when you can roll and roll and roll, why don't we just try that? You know, we could just try that, you know, just keep going. All of that kind of stuff, it does not focus us. You know, restrictions are helpful. And having limitations in life can be really good for our focus. I think I've found that over and over again. I like what it does to me. I like what it does to everybody on set. When you're rolling, it's important and it's going to end. You know, and yes, sometimes it's inconvenient, and sometimes it cuts off a great shot, and that's a bummer, but it refocuses you again. So there's something in those natural limitations that's helpful. And I just think that otherwise it can become, for lack of a better word, masturbatory and lazy.
Mm-hmm. And super geeky question, why is it that the passenger seat of the van is turned around? It's not facing.
That's not a super geeky question. That's an awesome question, and it's really I have to hand it to J-Dub, who is my production not my production manager, the art director. He's so fantastic, and we had gone and picked up that the Airstream together and drove it across the state before we shot. And that was kind of our little trip together to kind of, and as we drove, we talked and talked and talked about this couple. And Jeremy kind of came up with this idea all of a sudden about that seat and that Lou, and we you know, Lou is not facing frontwards. Ruben's like on this kind of like, just always facing forwards, you know, but he would, because Ruben built everything in that Airstream. Everything's built by Ruben. As a matter of fact, the way J-Dub built everything in that Airstream is as Ruben would have built it. So our rules were, it was only with a handsaw and a drill. You know, it was like, there was no router, there's nothing. So everything was kind of dogmatically built that way. But he would build this throne for Lou, and Lou is more, her writing process is always about looking back. She has all this pain. Ruben doesn't look back. Ruben does not, for the life of him, look back at his pain. He looks forward, and Lou looks back. And that's where she does all her writing when she's sitting there, and that's her place. So there's a real symbol to the fact that they're facing in two different directions.
Riz, did that help you with your relationship with Lou and with your character, with that idea that he's only looking forward? And
you know, I've never heard Darius talk about that choice in that way, and it's just brilliant. It's just like yet another detail. There's just so many intricate details in the way this is put together that really supported that process. But I guess on an instinctive level, it's something that you're aware of. You know, like I do all the driving, and she's kind of like lounging on this. Not quite throne, but and not quite a sick bed, but something in between the two, you know.
Yeah.
And there's something about me kind of carrying her, wanting to carry and wanting to protect her, and her having this kind of very kind of internal process. And there's actually a scene, you know, where she's writing, and you know, and I go to kind of. To kind of make sure there aren't any noise distractions for her writing process, you know, early on in the film. And it's another kind of example of their dynamic. You know, people say like ideally in a solid film, every scene contains within it the entire film. And I think that is the dynamic that's created time and time again. It's like, it gives Ruben a sense of purpose and belonging to have to protect and take care of Lou, because it means that he doesn't have to take care of himself, which first of all, he doesn't want to have to face. And second of all, he doesn't think he deserves. And so setting everything up in terms of, you know, even the way he wakes her up, he gets her breakfast. It's all part of that same dynamic, which I think just felt instinctively correct. without us ever having to analyze it and discuss it intellectually.
Yeah, and there's that, and there's the idea too, which is what happens when Lou starts wanting to face the other direction, you know, and you know, so remember, I almost said remember Ruben, remember Riz, there was that scene in the script where you go into the Airstream at one point and you go and sit in Lou's seat, which didn't end up in the cut, but the reason it was there, and this was when at the deaf community, the reason you go sit in Lou's seat is because at that moment in the film, you're trying to get back. You're trying to get back to something that has passed. And so there's a lot of concepts of these role reversals that are happening in this movie, where it's like the real bind for Ruben is that you are a person that always moves forward, but you're trying to get back, and it's a paradox. So it's going to end in something discordant. There's no way around it, you know, and that I have those seats, the seat directions was something that I delighted in from the moment that decision was made, because, and I'm so glad you brought it up. And by the way, no one's mentioned it before. So that's really cool.
Good, because I was like,
Yeah.
I was noticing, and you know, from when the first day I watched the film, and I was kind of like, why? And I sort of had guessed that it was because of the opposing forces of the two of them, you know, and that you were alluding to that. I do have to ask you about Paul Rossi. That must have been a very difficult role to cast, and he is just unbelievable. What a great performance. You know, can you tell us about?
I have to hand it to Susan Shopmaker and Julia, who are such awesome humans and incredibly rigorous casting directors, which is, you know, this was a worldwide search. It was a massive search for Joe. And I could completely trust in these guys because they understood who he was, but it took a long time. And you know, how do you find that, you know? And there's a lot of aspects to Joe. Joe's a veteran. He's a former addict, you know, he's from deaf culture, but he's late deafened, which means that he doesn't necessarily have a thick deaf accent. So it's really constricting if you want to get into a place of, you know, how do I find an authentic Joe? Because there's many things that make him authentic. And yeah, so eventually, like, really it was, and by the way, I just preface it by saying that I had dared the universe that there was a Joe, you know, I mean, it was an absurd gamble, truly an absurd gamble. I mean, I'm so happy I took that gamble and made it, and I wasn't going to do it any other way, but there was a moment not terribly long before we made the film where it looked impossible. And, he came along, his tape would make anybody cry, just his tape. I wish I could remember the last line of his audition tape, because it was something to the effect of, I will die with my guitar in my hand and you know, surrounded by doom metal or something crazy. But he's so awesome, and he really raised the vibration of you know, the whole set, and he's a revelation. He's a total revelation.
Riz, what was it like working with him? The scenes between you guys.
No, it was amazing. He's just such a kind of big heart, generous spirit. He, you know, he spent his life kind of as this bridge between the deaf and hearing worlds as a child of deaf adults. And so he also occupied that role to some extent on set. You know, he was kind of joining the dots between the hearing and the deaf, you know, members of the cast and crew, advocating for the needs of the deaf community that was there on set, you know, consistently just kind of occupying a similar kind of role of almost shepherding us, just like the character Joe does, you know, in the story. So there were a lot of kind of parallels there. But having said that, what he brought to the table was an incredible acting performance. You know, he's not playing himself. And so honestly, it was just like, you know, every now and again you work with someone and it's like, you don't have to do anything, but just be there with them, because they're giving you so much and they're so in it. In a way, your job is just to kind of dial into their frequency. And it was like that. It was just such a gift.
Yeah, you guys were both a gift to each other when you were shooting, and that's what's so it's such an incredible experience to watch as a director, especially when it's your script and watching these two people. I can't express it enough. I mean, the first cut of that last scene that you guys are in is a very long scene. Actually, it was like 18 minutes in the first cut. You know, it was like half the movie, and it was so hard to cut it because every take, uh, it was just outstanding. It was just popping. You guys were both doing that for each other. There was so much veracity in it. It was a wonderful thing to witness.
You used, cutting and which made me think about editing. And usually, you edit a film and then you work with the sound editing afterwards. And can you tell us the process? Because the sound design in this is so unique. Were you editing the visuals and the sound simultaneously, or is that something that you
And I
did?
love talking to you. I love these geeky questions. It's so great. Well, it's wonderful because, there's a lot of talk about the sound in this movie, which there should be, and it's a really incredible job that everybody did, and it was crazy. But you can't talk about the sound without the picture. They're integrally connected, and Mikkel, my editor, Mikkel Nielsen, is just outrageously talented editor. I really scoured for like the person who would kick my ass the most, and I'm an editor myself, and I needed someone stronger than me, and Mikkel is outrageous. He's so freaking talented. He edits like one movie every 3 years, and he kind of lives and breathes it. And he has a very deep sense of sound himself. He was a touring drummer, actually. Mikkel was. Yeah, and he's very connected to sound and rhythm and presence. And so yes, to answer your question, we had this ridiculously complicated workflow that had to involve Nicolas simultaneously with Mikkel and myself. And we were all working in tandem. And I would even travel to go with an editing system to go work alongside Nicolas to cut scenes simultaneously while he was doing sound design so that we could really play with what worked. And then we'd come back and we'd shift it. And that's what it really took. It was a really interesting dance. And I mean, it was fun. And one thing that was fun and hard. One thing that I really am interested in is the way that you combine disciplines in filmmaking, because I think so often we do think about them in this compartmentalized way. Like, now I do picture edit, now I do sound, now I do score, now I do this or that. When they talk to each other, it's very special because they start to move each other and they start to speak to each other, and then everything can get raised. And that's what happened at times during the process. It was awesome.
Mhm. The very last scene in the movie where we go in completely into his world, was that always in the script? Is that something that you discovered along the way?
No, that was always there. That was my true north. You're speaking about the very last moment of the movie.
Correct.
That was my like. I'm really interested in the way that that exists with the absence of everything. Right? You spend this whole film trying to get back to something that you find is really everything stripped away, and the idea of how can you feel that, how can you earn that, how can you earn that moment through this cut, that was such a wonderful kind of thing up there, a very high bar of experience. Now, first of all, there's not silence often in a movie, ever pure silence. There's usually some version of it that involves noise, and this was something that actually sound people were really pushed back on me about, because it just doesn't happen. Everyone's worried it will seem like a mistake. It'll seem like we made a mistake. But the idea was, hell no, everything's on purpose. We're gonna earn that moment. And until we've earned it, we're not done. We're not done with the cutting. We're not done until we've earned it, which means the absence of everything is in itself a catharsis.
Yeah, and what's really worth pointing out is that usually when you hear complete lack of sound in movies. There's a sense of dread. There's also could symbolize death.
Absolutely.
And instead, what you accomplish is the opposite, is a sense of freedom, a sense of rebirth, a sense of life. And it's quite a remarkable thing. So
Right. I think about it a lot of times when I was cutting and even writing, was the kind of when you're painting with watercolors, that if you want to have white as an experience in the painting, the white is the page, and it only exists with the colors around it. That's the only way that you can experience it. So
mhm.
it's only as good as all the colors around it. But when those colors are true and the form is true, it's radiant, and that concept of something that is the absence of everything being radiant is really meaningful to me anyway. That's kind of at the heart of what I think the entire film's about.
Riz, I do have to ask you about one of the most emotional scenes is you teaching, the young kids to drum. Can you tell us about working with them and
Yeah.
that's
Well, in particular, that's working with Domenico Toledo, and the whole Toledo family are pretty much in this movie. And Joe Toledo is part of the addiction circle in the movie as well. And they were just so generous and brought such an amazing kind of energy to the whole set. So it's kind of amazing working with kids because they just force you to put away all your plans and clever ideas, and they just kind of are so impulsive and so true and honest to the moment that they keep you honest. And again, it's an amazing gift working with them. There can be challenges as well, but most of those challenges, as I said, are about putting down your ideas of how it should go or what it should be, and forcing yourself to kind of be present, without all your clever schemes in your back pocket. So it was amazing. It was a tremendous joy, quite frankly, to be welcomed into, get a glimpse of deaf culture in that way, and through those kids and their mischief and their playfulness and their strength. You know, it was something that kind of I felt very much cloaked in that kind of that love. And I think Ruben does, at that point of the story as well. So it was very, it was a really moving experience and a really enriching one.
And Darius casting, we haven't talked about Olivia. Tell us about casting her and working with her. She's terrific in the film.
She's so good. Olivia's really a raw talent in a kind of shocking way. I mean, she's something, my God. And I think that it's hard. What I knew about her role, I mean, again, I mentioned that I had really gone very deep into her character, and she was so important to me. Lou as a character is so important to me. But what I understood in the construct of the film is that the truth of their relationship, the truth of Lou, has to be present in the whole movie. She does leave for a period of time, but if that wasn't ringing as a real, as an energetic relationship, if you didn't understand that dynamic that they had together, it wouldn't work, because Ruben is trying to get back to something. You could say he's trying to get back to his hearing, or maybe he's trying to get back to Lou, and recapture that. And so if you didn't believe in that, what's happening in the movie? So I needed an actor that could hold the screen when they were off the screen for 40 minutes. And that was a real challenge, because and for me, it wasn't about, so how do you find that? What I was really looking for in an actor was someone of the talent level that Olivia has, which I really perceived when I first met her, but also someone who had something in Lou that they needed to exercise,
Mhm.
something that was important to me. And I found that in Olivia. She had something that she was bringing to this role that she needed, that needed to happen. And that began with that stage, and it followed the whole arc of her journey. And I think that is at the heart of why you feel her in the way she does, in the way you do, because she went to a very brave place to bring that. She really did. She went to a very brave place to bring that into life.
And Riz, tell us about working with Olivia.
Everything that Darius is saying is spot on. She's alongside that. What I would just add is, some people are just incredibly talented and they can dial into a scene and be really emotional and all that stuff. That's always amazing. And there are some kind of like aliens that can do that, and then in between takes just be like cracking jokes and laughing and making you laugh. That to me is just like a whole other level of like, emotional flexibility. And she wasn't doing that all the time. I don't mean to say as if she wasn't present. She was, but in a way, it was kind of her way of I think I heard her talk about it and say, look, because we were going to such an intense place a lot of the time, it was a way of not wallowing indulgently in that emotional place. It was about preserving some of that energy for the take. And it also kind of kept me incredibly kind of relaxed, kept us connected, kept us playful. Sometimes when people are doing emotional scenes, they can all be, stuck away in their own bubble, and then you come together and you do the scene. But she was very, very much kind of keeping that connection alive with us between takes in the most charming and playful way that, again, kind of threw me out of my comfort zone, made me more present. She's just an amazing person. She's just full of surprises. So much of the improvisation that's in the film comes from her, in those early scenes where we're driving together and she's telling all those crazy stories. And she's talking about Meatloaf doing anal sex. That's Olivia, man. She'll just come out left field with something that will just hit you. So yeah, man, I just got much love for her.
She's also, like almost all incredible actors, she's obscenely sensitive. Like Olivia is one of those ones who will be cracking jokes, but simultaneously seeing and hearing everything in the room. And I think it's partially why she does that, actually, because she's so hypersensitive that she needs to diffuse. Like Olivia knows when she's shooting that she's going to be in this realm, that she's going to enter into that, she's going to give to that sensitivity. And when she's off camera, she needs to shut it off because she's so hyper attuned, and so I would venture to say people are going to see a lot of Olivia in her career, because she's kind of outrageous.
And Darius, last question. One of my favorite movies is Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and I see so many connections between your film and Diving Bell. Was Matthew Almeric, the casting of him, a coincidence that there's a bridge between the two films?
There are no coincidences. I mean, yeah, it's weird. Well, Diving Bell is important to me too. And it's obviously a really committed first-person sensory experience that happens to star Mathieu. And I had this feeling about Mathieu really early on, and it was definitely connected to Diving Bell, and it was also connected to there's a Serge Gainsbourg in that character as well, and I felt like he really approximates that. He has that innate kind of French Jewish quality that I was interested in being there, and it was just really specifically written into that character. So he was this like, God, I would love to have Mathieu, and then it just worked, and then it just happened, and it was unbelievable because he doesn't go through an agent or anything. Mathieu is just such a legit, manic, amazing kind of artist. I mean, manic, and in the best way. I just love manic people. I love when people are at that. The first time I sat with Mathieu at a restaurant in Paris when we first met, and we were talking about this thing he was going to write, and I said something, and he went, "Oh my God, I have to go," and he was like, "I'm going to drive through the night, and I'm going to drive to a place in Bretagne, and I'm going to write as the sun comes up, and I'm leaving right now." And he did, and he left, and he sends me a picture as he was arriving to this house as the sun's coming up, like 6-7 hours later, and he wrote his whole script, and that's the way he goes. So he had reached out after seeing this script, and he reached out to, he wrote a letter to my producers and he said, I want to be part of Darius's world. That was it. And I just was like, man, this is a dream come true, because he is. And then I got really excited about him and Riz together, because who's ever seen 4 eyes like theirs in the same room? You know, I had to see that.
Yeah. Well, gents, it's been a pleasure. I could go on talking to you guys for a longer time, but it's just been wonderful. And congratulations to both. What a terrific performance. What a terrific directing job, Darius. So thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. It's been
Thank
awesome.
you, man. Thanks for the brilliant question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Bless you. See you soon.
All right. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Take care, brother.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.